Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Thank you for tuning in. Perhaps you're listening to the radio at 5:30 drive time, or as I say, you're listening on a podcast around the world. Wherever you are, whoever you are, a warm welcome. Today, we're blessed to have Leisa McDonald from Matthew House. So, Leisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.
So, Leisa, first of all, tell us a little bit about Matthew House. What is it all about?
Well, interestingly, right now it is not officially a house, but that is the long-term goal and initiative. I've worked within the refugee resettlement space for quite a few years through Central Christian Church. And one of the common issues that kept coming up was this need for housing and housing support. So our long-term goal is to actually have a place that families would arrive and would have a place that they can acclimate to life in the United States, where they'll have employment, where they'll have the opportunity to learn the language in a safe space, and just again have community in that process. So that's the long-term goal and vision of Matthew House. For today, we provide housing subsidies given the market that we're in and the cost prohibitive nature of getting families into safe communities and into places where they can flourish once they're here in the United States and making this their home. We also provide language programs, tutoring programs for children, mentoring programs for families so that they can again have someone who's walking with them on that journey of learning about life in the United States. And then providing some scholarships and job development work will be some of our future opportunities for families as they arrive. So we're actually pretty brand new as an organization, despite having done some of this work for quite a few years. We just actually launched the nonprofit in July of 2021.
That's wonderful. And so really it's reaching out to as scripture would say, to the foreigner, to the alien, and helping them to become part of society and to work within that society. And I know me being from Europe, from the good old UK. When I first arrived here, speak the same language, understand Western sort of culture to a degree, and still for me it was sort of bewildering. You drive on the side of the road and you can't buy certain things here and you have to buy them there, and you can't just sort of walk up to a dentist and say, hey, operate. There's all these new, like, for me it was trivial,
Yes.
trivial things of being integrated into a society. But I'm completely guessing at this point, and you can correct me, if you do come into the country not able to speak the language from a different culture and environment and ways of doing things, it must be daunting, frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, when you come here and you're choosing to be in the United States, that's one thing, right? But when you've had to flee a country because of persecution for religious or political or other reasons, and you've experienced trauma in that journey, you add trauma to the picture, you add language barriers to the picture, and again, people have been broken from community, from their culture, from their norms. And in some cases, families have lived in refugee camps for an extended period of time. We're working with one family now that is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they were in a refugee camp in Tanzania for 25 years. And so if you consider life in a refugee camp, you don't ever have to go source food at a grocery store or pay rent for your apartment kind of thing. So all of those new realities as they're coming into the United States are pretty significant. And just there's so many hurdles and barriers that families have to cross. And without the language skill to be able to do that, having welcoming friends that help them navigate that process is very, very important. And so that's what we have the opportunity to provide.
So I'm just thinking to myself, you're speaking about how people have been in the concentration camps for 20, excuse me. People have been in the immigration camps for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, this particular family, the average is probably closer to 17 years that families can be in those environments. But for the average person, so like if you look at places like Syria, those families were in the early stages of arriving here as refugees. Those families had been in another community. So they left their home in Syria, had fled into neighboring countries, and had been in those locations for maybe at that time, probably 18 months to 3 years. That was the average length of time that the immigration process takes across the pond, as it were, before coming into the United States or into another resettlement country. But that obviously extended when administration changes and limitations were placed on certain people arriving. So now families arriving from Syria have been displaced for probably closer to 9 or 10 years prior to arriving in the country. So it depends upon the group, it depends upon the circumstances, but it can be, again, a wide variety. But typically the average is it takes it at minimum 18 to 36 months to go through the entire process. And then depending upon circumstance and how long they've been in those camps, it can be on average about 17 years in a refugee camp.
Wow. And so, during that time, you're speaking from someone who's just basically ignorant, in the sense of not having any understanding of what life must be like within an immigration camp. And so, but it doesn't take much to realize that it's not going to be very pleasant and sometimes dangerous and I guess traumatic. I was talking to one brother a few months back who was in a immigration camp for a long time. They're saying everything was stripped. The family was stripped from him. This is a place from Africa, and his culture was stripped. And he's living in a tent in a foreign country where no one wants him. Right. And so they arrive in the United States. They're here, and so how do you even approach? What's your first steps of welcoming these people, helping them to know that you're on their side?
Mm-hmm. It depends upon situation, but when we get the opportunity, greeting someone at the airport and being one of the first friendly faces that's smiling at them and welcoming them is ideal. If that is not the story, then being able to arrive at someone's home with a translator, someone who can communicate in their language, is the second best, because then you have someone who can communicate. They have that comfort level of knowing that there's a person that can speak their own language. So in some recent scenarios, we have a community of individuals through our church that speak Swahili, and so this family that arrived from the Democratic Republic of Congo, they were able to go in and be part of the welcoming team, be part of that group that welcomed them. So they have someone who speaks their language as part of that team, and can be that bridge for others who don't speak that language. But we come in and we basically just start befriending, bring gifts of things like fruit, fresh fruit, find out what needs are, find out how we can best support. We work alongside resettlement agencies, so they will let us know what types of support infrastructure they would like us to offer in addition to what they offer. We bring in opportunities for English language learning, so we have formal classes that they can attend, or the team, we encourage the individuals that are part of that welcome team to be helping them learn language within their home. So this is a table, this is a chair, this is a stove, and again, just helping them learn those tools. And again, if you think about going into a strange country and you think about someone who's there willingly helping you navigate, they quickly go from being a mentor to a friend, because that becomes someone you rely upon. And so those are the common ways we approach. But again, ideally, it's wonderful if we can meet people at the airport and begin that relationship from the moment they touch ground in the United States. But more frequently recently, it's been a little different than that, through kind of a couple days or weeks after they arrive, coming alongside and again, offering support services.
my next question is, how can people get involved? When I listen to you, I almost freeze up, mentally freeze up. It's such a big task.
Yeah.
You've got these poor people coming from war torn or whatever the negative situation is. Coming to a new frightening country, despite how wonderful this country is. If frightening, different language. What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my children? Are we going to feed? Are we going to be accepted? How can we evolve in? So it's kind of like, well, what can I do? I'm not a counselor. I can't do certain things. So what would you say to someone who was listening now on the radio or on the computer, and they're thinking, my heart goes out to these people, but there's really nothing that I can do to help? What would you say?
Well, I think we've all been there at some point. It seems daunting, it seems overwhelming, but there's always, little places that we can get started. One of the places that I often send teams to just kind of experience, interacting with a refugee is an organization called Welcome to America Project. Their team delivers furniture goods into homes, and it's a great opportunity to hear a refugee's story. And it's what I call a low entry opportunity. So you're delivering furniture, you're being a smiling face, you're providing a welcome. But if it's intimidating and overwhelming, then you can step back out, and there's all the more needed that day, right? But if you lean into that and you feel like, hey, I'd like to do more, some next step opportunities are things like getting involved in a tutoring program, or an adult language learning program. And so my organization in the East Valley of Phoenix is one opportunity. Abounding Service is another partner organization that does language learning classes. So they would be a place in North Phoenix that people could get involved. And you're just being an encourager and a coach. And all of us who speak English can help someone else learn, because it's truly that conversational interaction that is what helps build the skill for people who are new to this country. So that's a kind of a secondary step in. And then if they're interested in something like a welcome team, we have training for that. And we simply provide the training. We encourage people to bring together friends and family members to join them and being part of a team. We try to build teams of 10 or more so that no one has to do it alone, right? We don't want people to feel intimidated. It is overwhelming. The needs are great when people first arrive. And, the group that comes alongside tends to be the community. And in very communal cultures, there's a lot of expectation on community. So that's what we call the deep end of the pond, where you're planning to be involved and engaged for the long term and really help people. But there's training that is, that we provide for that. And we typically have someone who can help coach teams. So we try not to leave anybody alone and kind of having to navigate without support systems.
That's encouraging, because suddenly when something's sort of given to you, you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to make matters worse. And
right.
So the fact that you are there, figuratively speaking, holding people's hands, training them, enabling them to serve is encouraging. Gives us that ability of, maybe I can do this. And I'm just thinking of the Christian body, when we're all given, as Paul would say, different, analogy of the body. We're all giving different skills, different abilities. Right. Some of us aren't meant to be counselors, but all of us can pray. All of us can befriend people, and so find what our skill is. So before we go further, we're listening to The Kingdom and Its Stories. My name is Julian Gibb, and today we're blessed to have Leisa McDonald from an organization that is or will be called Matthew House. And it's an organization that seeks to reach out to refugees who are coming into this country, people who have fled extremely dire situations and are starting anew here. So Leisa, my question to you is, last night I was researching about the organization and about yourself, and looks like you had a pretty successful career before you started doing this sort of thing. So why on earth would you put that aside? It's easy. You turn up, you sit behind a cubicle, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not put it down, but behind a cubicle, and you turn up, you do your work, you clock out, you go home. Hurrah!
Right.
So why on earth would you give up that cushy lifestyle of lower class and be involved in something that at times is heartbreaking? Why are you doing this?
Wow, I've never had it positioned quite like that, Julian. So thank you for that. So several years ago, actually, when I was still working in corporate America, we lived in Indiana, and I had the opportunity to travel to Lebanon. And it was my first opportunity to meet as an adult another refugee, or a refugee, I guess, at that time, someone who had fled Syria. Actually, they had fled Iraq. Let me go back to my correct story, or the first interaction in Lebanon was with families that had fled Iraq, and it was mind blowing for a couple of reasons. One, they were talking about the ousting of Saddam Hussein and the fact that they had been, as Christians, protected under his rule. And when the new government was set up, they were forced to flee because now they were being persecuted for their faith. And so as a Christian, it was a compelling, these are people who are fleeing for their faith because they were being asked to, give up their faith in Jesus Christ, denounce their Christianity, or they were going to lose their lives. And they chose to flee their country, giving up their jobs, their careers, their homes, their family units, because they couldn't obviously bring everyone with them. And it really struck at the heart of me that, this is real for people. When we talk about persecution, we talk about it in the United States, but I don't think we really have a concept of it until, you're talking to people who had the choice of, life, having to flee, or, being killed for their faith. And it becomes a very different story. And, recognizing that these were, middle-class people in their communities, sometimes even affluent people in their communities, that fled because of their belief in Jesus Christ and wanting to not give up faith, but wanting to maintain their lives, right? And taking their children and coming into another country and now living basically at the, looking for the kindness and the care of the people around them, because they couldn't fend for themselves in that new location. Just gave me again, it wrecked me on a lot of levels. And shortly thereafter, we moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And at that time, I had given up my job moving to Arizona. We had 10 and 12-year-old girls at the time. And so I started volunteering at a church, ended up working for a church, and in working for that church, got involved in refugee programming, because my heart just said, if I believe believe in the word of Jesus Christ, that I'm to feed, clothe, and welcome the stranger, and I need to be about that. Listening to the stories of people who fled and what they experienced for their belief in Jesus Christ told me that I need to be that welcoming face on the other end, receiving them as brothers and sisters in Christ. Or if there's someone who's not a believer in Jesus, how do you help people come to have faith in Jesus if we don't welcome them in his name, right? So that was part of my journey of leaving corporate America, moving into what I do today. And then again, leaving the church most recently to start the nonprofit, was recognizing that I could do a lot through my church, but I could do even more stepping outside. The opportunity to influence and impact more lives is going to take place outside of my individual church, and working alongside the kingdom at large, as it were, and working alongside a lot of churches in the community as a whole. And that's been true. We're working right now with Afghan evacuees that have arrived in Phoenix, and it's being able to mobilize multiple churches and multiple groups of people to do the work that we're doing today, serving between 250 to 450 people each day with food and resources, alongside our resettlement agency partners. Again, that takes a lot of people, and it takes the body of Christ as a whole coming together to do that. So that's my story, and it's what's led me to where I am today. But again, walking out my faith in just being a person who says, if this is what Jesus calls me to do, then, and this is how he has skilled me, and created me to be, then this is what I'm going to lean into, and this is how I'm going to live my life. So definitely different than my 9 to 5 in my corporate career, but I wouldn't give it up for anything.
So for me to paraphrase you, and correct me where I go wrong, there was a passion in your heart. God placed something on your heart, and so you stepped out and did it.
Yes. That's a good paraphrase.
so for again, correct me where I go wrong. So I'm putting words into your mouth. So for me, for those listening, I guess sometimes you can get paralyzed. You think you have to start something dramatic. First day. It has to be big. It has to take on. It has to correct all the ills of the world. Like it's all on me. And it's really it's just. Would you say just pray about it, step out and start, and allow God to guide you along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think prayer, and I do think your point of just stepping in where you're able, and then being responsive when God opens doors to step into the next, and doing that prayerfully. Like I didn't launch a nonprofit without having worked in this space and working with the resettlement agencies, other key nonprofits, the state office, and understanding about what the needs were in our community. I didn't launch something without that knowledge and background, but God continued to provide information and opportunity, and just step, and as you go along a path and following God's leading, it guides you down a place maybe you wouldn't have ever thought. So that's where we landed.
So how can someone listening, how can they help you? How can they help Matthew House? How can they get involved? What would you, because I've been looking up about you, and if someone's listening now, and then I feel the Lord is calling me to get involved. How can people be supporting your organization?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So because we're working right now with the Afghan community, as well as the other families that we've been supporting prior to that, there's a couple different programs that we offer. We do language programs for adults. We do tutoring programs for children. So those are always opportunities for people to step in and get involved. Right now, the support for the Afghan community is pretty significant, and we're serving families at hotels. And so we're serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so it's a pretty easy step in. Again, if you have time in your morning, or you have time in your afternoon or evening, and can come to a hotel in the Phoenix area and serve a meal, the meals are provided, the food is provided. It's simply helping get the food delivered into the hands of the families that are in need right now. Sometimes it's donations. Some people say, and I was this way for many years. Again, when I worked corporately, I didn't have time. And so financial gifts were always a way to be able to help. The way we're using those finances right now, again, as I mentioned earlier, housing subsidies, as these families move into the community, their initial job or employment situations may leave them not able to fund their entire rent, or will give them very little room. Our goal is to subsidize so that they only have to pay a portion through private funding. And then we will cover the differential until they're stabilized and able to afford that on their own. So that's one way we use finances, and then food supports and resource supports at the hotel, plus materials for classes.
And do you have a website, or is there a phone number, or how would someone get in contact with you?
So our website is matthewhouseaz.org. And that has a link to a get involved. And so if someone's interested in getting involved, they can send in information, and then we will follow up with them from there. Again, there's ways to donate on that page as well.
Excellent. Well, you've been listening to The Kingdom and its stories. You've been listening to Leisa McDonald from Matthew House. You have the web address. So prayerfully consider how God is calling you to get involved. Thank you and God bless.